This is what happens when Texas rewrites how food trucks operate statewide. The state has passed House Bill 2844, known as the Food Truck Freedom Bill, and starting July 1, 2026, the entire permitting system for food trucks changes. Right now, if you run a food truck in Texas, your business doesn't just exist in one place. You might operate in Houston one day, the Woodlands the next, maybe Galveston after that. But every one of those cities has its own rules, its own permits, and its own inspections. And that's where the problem starts. Because under the current system, food truck operators are forced to duplicate everything. If you want to work across multiple cities, you don't just expand your business, you multiply your costs, your paperwork, and your compliance burden. That's exactly what this new law is trying to fix. Starting July 1, 2026, the Texas Department of State Health Services will take over all food truck permitting statewide. That means one license, one system, and one central authority instead of dozens of local ones. And on the surface, that sounds like a massive win. But like most regulatory changes, the real story isn't just what's being removed, it's what's being replaced. Let's break this down. First, the problem this law is trying to solve. For years, food truck operators in Texas have been dealing with a fragmented system. Every city, every county, every jurisdiction could require its own permit, its own inspection, and its own fees. That means if you're a mobile business, you're not just moving locations, you're stepping into entirely new regulatory environments every time you cross a city line. And those costs add up fast. There's a real example from a Houston-based food truck called Boot Shooters BBQ. They've been operating for 6 years, and to run their business across different cities like Houston, the Woodlands, and Galveston, they've had to pay for separate permits and inspections in each one. Not optional, required. Now scale that across an entire year, across multiple trucks, across different cities, it becomes a serious operational burden. And it's not just about inconvenience, it's about cost. One operator in Bryan reportedly spends around $2,400 in December alone just to cover permits and licenses across multiple cities. 1 month, one operator, one category of expense. That's the kind of friction this bill is targeting. So what does the new system actually do? House Bill 2844 replaces that entire patchwork with a single statewide permit. Instead of applying in every city you operate in, you apply once through the state. Instead of going through multiple inspections, you go through one centralized process, and the cost difference is significant. That same operator in Bryan who was spending roughly $2,400 under the new system, that drops to just $238 per food truck. That's not a small adjustment. That's a structural change in how the business works. Lower costs, less duplication, fewer administrative barriers. For operators, especially those trying to grow or operate across multiple locations, that's real relief. And for cities like Houston, where food trucks are already an established part of the local food scene, this could open the door for even more mobility and expansion. But this is where the second half of the story comes in, because this isn't just about removing local permits. It's also about replacing them completely, and that replacement comes with a hard requirement. Your existing city permits, especially in places like Houston, will no longer be valid after June 2026. That includes permits and medallions issued by the city. Once July 1st hits, those local approvals don't matter anymore. If you want to operate legally anywhere in Texas, you must have a permit from the Texas Department of State Health Services. No exceptions. And that's where the pressure starts to build. Because every active food truck operator now has a deadline. This isn't a gradual shift where both systems run side by side for years. It's a cutoff. After June 2026, the old system is effectively dead, and the transition window starts even earlier. The switchover begins May 1st, 2026. That means operators don't just need to understand the new system, they need to act on it quickly. They need to re-register, they need to get approved, and they need to make sure they're compliant before July 4th. Otherwise, they can't operate. That's the catch with real consequences. On one hand, the law simplifies everything. It reduces costs, it removes duplication, it creates a single pathway for operating across the entire state. On the other hand, it introduces a hard dependency on one system. If you don't have that state permit, you're out. No fallback, no local workaround, no temporary coverage from your existing city approvals. You either transition successfully or your business stops, and that changes the risk profile. Before, The system was fragmented and expensive, but it also had redundancy. If one city had an issue, it didn't necessarily shut down your entire operation. Now everything runs through one channel, which means everything depends on that channel working and on operators navigating it correctly. So for Houston operators specifically, this is a mixed moment. There's real upside. Lower costs, fewer permits, less administrative overhead. For a business like Boot Shooters BBQ, that could mean less time dealing with paperwork and more time actually running the business. It could also make it easier to expand into new areas without worrying about stacking permits and inspections. But there's also a hard deadline and a required reset. Every operator has to go through the new system. Every operator has to replace what they already have, and every operator has to do it within a defined window. That's where the tension sits, because anytime a system changes this dramatically, the benefits are clear, but so are the risks during the transition. And this isn't a small tweak. This is a full replacement of how food trucks are regulated across the entire state. So stepping back, what does this actually mean long term? At a high level, Texas is moving toward a centralized model. Instead of local control, the state is taking over. Instead of multiple systems, there's one system, and instead of layered costs, there's a single fee structure. For operators, that likely means lower barriers to entry and easier scaling across cities. For the state, it means more consistent oversight. But in the short term, it means one thing above everything else: change. Real, immediate, deadline-driven change that every food truck operator in Texas has to respond to. Because after July 1st, 2026, the rules are no longer local, they're statewide. And if you're not in that system, you're not operating at all.